In the year 605 BC, King Nebuchadnezzar's army breached the walls of Jerusalem. The Babylonians conquered the physical territory, and then they systematically set out to steal the city's future. Nebuchadnezzar's forces stripped the fallen city of its most valuable resource. They rounded up the brightest, most capable teenagers from Judah's royal and noble families and deported them 500 miles away to Babylon. Among these captives was a young man named Daniel. Upon arrival, he was thrust into a rigorous 3-year state indoctrination program. The empire forced him to learn a new language, immersed him in their literature, and stripped him of his Hebrew name. They called him Belteshazzar. Every detail was engineered to sever his connection to his homeland and his God. The empire's strategy relied entirely on psychological erasure. By controlling what they learned, what they were called, and what they ate, Babylon intended to absorb them completely until nothing of their original identity remained. When a hostile system is actively trying to dismantle who you are, survival requires drawing a hard line. And the most effective resistance rarely starts with a massive, highly visible rebellion. It begins with the smallest, most seemingly insignificant daily choices. For Daniel, that line was drawn at the dinner table. The king provided his captives with a daily ration of rich royal food and wine. But for a devout Hebrew, eating meat that was likely sacrificed to Babylonian idols and prepared outside of strict kosher laws was a direct violation of their covenant with God. To eat was to submit. Daniel made a quiet but absolute internal decision. He would not defile himself. But rather than throwing a self-righteous tantrum or staging a public hunger strike, he approached his captors with profound tact. He respectfully asked the chief official for an exemption. He proposed a highly specific, measurable trial, asking the official to give his group a strict diet of only vegetables and water for 10 days. After that, the official could evaluate their physical condition against the young men eating the royal menu, deciding their fate based strictly on the evidence. At the end of the 10 days, Daniel and his friends looked noticeably healthier and stronger than every single peer who had assimilated. Because they held their ground, the king eventually found them to be 10 times more capable in matters of wisdom and understanding than all his seasoned advisors. If you surrender your convictions over a plate of food, you will fold when your life is actually on the line. Uncompromising faith practiced quietly in the dark is the exact mechanism that builds resilience for a public crisis. Decades pass. Daniel navigates the Babylonian political machine and rises to immense power. Then a crisis strikes. King Nebuchadnezzar is plagued by a terrifying dream, but he wakes up unable to remember the details. The king issues an impossible demand. His advisors must tell him both what the dream was and what it means. If they fail, every wise man in Babylon, including Daniel, will be executed. Facing a literal death sentence, Daniel doesn't panic. He asks the king for a little time, gathers his friends, and relies entirely on a disciplined, dependent prayer life. They plead with God to reveal the mystery. This table maps Daniel's prayer of thanksgiving. The themes and theology columns reveal a pattern. He credits God as the sole distributor of wisdom and power. Highlighting the motivation row, he acknowledges this was given to him, a humility that defends against worldly arrogance. Daniel survives a lethal professional crisis in a ruthlessly secular environment for one reason: he sourced his wisdom and power completely outside of that system. We fast forward nearly 70 years. Daniel is now an 85-year-old top administrator serving under a completely new regime, King Darius of the Medo-Persian Empire. Daniel is so effective that the king plans to put him in charge of the entire kingdom. His political rivals are furious. They dig for dirt, but find absolutely no corruption or negligence in his record. So they weaponize his faith. They manipulate the king into passing an irreversible law. For 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or human other than King Darius will be thrown to the lions. When Daniel hears the decree is published, he walks into his house, goes to his upstairs room, opens the windows toward Jerusalem, gets down on his knees, and he begins to pray. He does this 3 times a day, exactly as he had done before. Choosing his daily communion with God over a royal edict, Daniel is arrested, dragged before the king, and thrown directly into the lion's den. No one magically survives the ultimate tests of their life by suddenly discovering courage at the last second. They survive because they have spent decades practicing uncompromising obedience when no one was watching. The next morning, the king rushes to the pit and finds Daniel completely unharmed. God had shut the mouths of the lions. Daniel is lifted out, and his accusers meet the fate they designed for him, and the king issues a decree honoring Daniel's God across the entire earth. There is a profound historical paradox here. The seemingly invincible Babylonian and Medo-Persian empires eventually collapsed, leaving behind nothing but crumbled bricks and dust. Yet Daniel's legacy remains completely unbroken. He managed to influence the most powerful kings on earth and bend the trajectory of an entire culture, precisely because he steadfastly refused to let that culture bend him. We are caught between two competing metrics for success. The world scoreboard demands wealth, assimilation, and power. God's scoreboard demands obedience, prayer, and integrity. By playing to win on God's scoreboard, Daniel paradoxically achieved massive influence on the world's terms. The empires around us will always demand assimilation. But your ability to stand firm in the lion's dens of tomorrow is built entirely by the quiet, uncompromising habits of prayer and integrity you choose to practice today.